welcome to another episode of Tell Muses. Today we have with us the wonderful, the brilliant, the master in character voices, Vicky Ness, all the way from sunny California in the US. Welcome, Vicky.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here.
So this is Despina Rio, and together with Simona Stambazzi, we're going to interview and find out more about our guest today. So, Vicky, I have the tendency of always starting these episodes in the same way by asking our guest, for our listeners, who is Vicky Ness?
Oh, dear. Well, of course, it depends on the day you ask. But when I was a child, I used to listen to music and I had a little rocking chair and I had millions of fantasies. I saved the earth from Martians hundreds of times, hundreds of times. So you could put that down. I saved the earth from Martians, and I'm resting on those laurels. That'll do.
And Vicky, so we're here to talk about storytelling and stories. And what I'm always interested to know is how did it all start for you? So were you told stories when you were little? Did you grow up with stories? Did you meet stories with books? Or did you meet stories when you were older? How did it all start for you?
Well, as I said, when I was a child, we lived off in a sort of remote, sort of, it was a small subdivision and there weren't a lot of kids to play with when I was very young. So, but I had a record player and we had my father's it was three 78 RPM records of Grieg's Piano Concerto number 6. And I had my little rocking chair and I would tell myself stories. And as I grew older, of course, I was read stories as a child, and I was very fortunate that I had books. And then when I was in my mid 30s, I went to a storytelling conference. And the cool thing about storytelling conferences is that you get to see all kinds of people telling all kinds of stories. And that made me think, I can do that. Because if I had gone to a performance of just one person, I would compare myself to that person and think, well, I can't do that. But if you see a whole stage of people and there's all kinds of stories, you can't help but think, I could do that. And then you go home and you give it a try, and I did. So that's where that began.
And do you want to share a little bit about what you're doing with storytelling nowadays?
Sure. When I started telling stories, I did it for about 15 years, from the mid 80s until the early 90s. No, from the mid 80s till like the middle 90s. And I told, to audiences and uh, larger audiences, small bookstore audiences, whatever, but I also did storytelling on the radio. And that was a lot of fun. And I actually created my own radio show, which was really fun. And then after that, I joined a group that was an art group, and they gave me a chance to teach improvisational storytelling in San Francisco's financial district. And I did that for a couple of semesters, and then they ran out of funding, and that was that. But it sure was fun because they were 12-hour workshops, and it was very dense and all that. Anyway, long story short, my work became bigger and bigger and bigger, and I wound up in the end not doing storytelling for for a while. It wasn't until um, 2020 that I retired. At the same time, COVID showed up, and all of a sudden, I discovered storytelling on Zoom. And so I started telling stories all over the place, everywhere. And I started teaching. And so that 12-hour storytelling workshop became a 2-hour storytelling Zoom workshop. And so I still do that. And I'm looking to go to our local community college here and teach kids how to create their own stories. So that's where I am at the moment.
We had the exact same conversation with a Canadian fellow yesterday, Norman Perrin. Do you know Norman?
No, I don't.
Oh. He was telling us about his technique of how he uses everything he has, anything he has in the immediate environment as props in order to get kids motivated and create the story. So
Uh-huh.
do you have a similar technique? Do you use things?
Well, no. What I do, first off, I teach college age and up. I teach adults. And I like doing that because adults are so frightened of telling stories, to be honest. Kids have no problems. Adults are terrified. And so my process is pretty much I have a 4-part process. And the first part is about listening because we have this understanding that if somebody says, "Can you tell a story?" we think it has to come from up here. And our ego runs around screaming, "You have to have a good story. It better be good." And in fact, stories don't come from here. You can't tell a story if you haven't listened to it first. And by listening, I mean you have to stop and let a story come from inside of you. Or if you're telling a folk tale, when you're going through a book of folk tales, if you're looking for a story that exactly fits what you think everybody wants, you're not going to fall in love with it. You have to listen to the story. And so listening is the beginning, not telling. And so there are exercises for what it feels like to listen as opposed to tell a story. We think it begins with telling, it doesn't. And so I use, for example, scent. If you have a scent that is evocative to you, allow a memory to come up. If I smell cardamom, for example, I'm right back in Christmas because I had a Norwegian grandmother who would show up with pastries filled with, almond paste and cardamom and cinnamon, and the whole house would smell of it. And I can see her in her fuchsia colored winter coat and her twinkly blue eyes behind the glasses. And I can see it all. And I'm just right there. I don't care if it's summer. When I smell cardamom, it's Christmas. And that's a different thing. If somebody had said, come up with a Christmas memory, make it up, I would be trying to structure something. My grandmother with those pastries simply exists. She just does. That's the color of the coat she had. And that's what it's like to listen to your stories because you are not creating it. It simply exists and you're listening. It's a very humbling experience, and it's a little bit, to my mind, spiritual because you are not directing it. The deal is to be more of a receptor, somebody who's listening, than a vending machine. You're not a vending machine, a storytelling vending machine. And so you learn to honor yourself and the stories that come up. The second part is about playing, but it's very disciplined play. What we do is we start a story. You're allowed to do 3 lines. So you do your 3 lines, and I hand you the first line, and you have to do the next 2, and then we stop it. And then you get another prompt, and you start the first 2 lines, and we stop it. And we do this over and over. And the reason we do this is to stop the ego from running in and saying, okay, so the story has to go like this. If you're just telling the first 3 lines of what you might read in a book and you drop it, it's open-ended. You are not ending it. You are not, there's nothing. There's just the first 3 lines. And if you do that over and over, something starts to hook into you and you say, but I want to finish it. Drop it, let it go. Drop it, let it go. Let it go, let it go. Because if you wait for the first beginnings of a story to come up and you grab it and you white knuckle it, it'll die. You have to believe in the abundance and you have to feel the abundance. You have to let something come up that, ooh, and let it go. And that takes discipline. That's not easy. And you do this over and over and over. There is a saying by an old film star, Mae West, and she basically said, I don't worry about losing a man. They're like streetcars. If I lose a man, another one will come by in 10 minutes. And it's the same thing with stories. It's okay. It'll come back. It'll come back. And you have to learn to trust. And so you not only learn the discipline of listening, you learn the abundance of the stories that you have to tell. And so we do that in various ways, but you get into the habit of starting something and let something blossom and then let it go. And it's a very freeing experience when you do it enough. And then we create caricatures, and they're just silly characters, and there's a process of doing that where you do word association and you come up with a funny character. So for example, a character I came up with doing that, his name is Odious Clutch, and he's a horrible person. He's terrible. When Halloween comes around and the kids come up with their bags and say trick or treat, he eats the candy in front of them and throws the paper wrapper in the bag and slams the door because he's a rotten person. He's rotten. And you can get into the whole description of, he's pale as the underbelly of a silverfish, and he wears black raggedy clothes so he looks like a crow that has been run over in the road. He's a horrible person. So now you've got your character, and whoever it is, you can come up with whatever characters you want. And we just put them aside. Because in every character, in the DNA of that character, is the plot. There's a plot waiting for them inside that character. And we'll get around to that when you get to the structuring the story. The third part is about inspiration. And so what we do is we listen to music. And I give people a choice of music. It should be instrumental. It should be evocative. Preferably if there's vocals, there's no words that you can understand. It could be the theme song to a movie, providing you haven't seen the movie. It's all about allowing something to come up for you. So if you hear, say, Gollywog's Cakewalk from Debussy, it's very silly and funny. Allow something to come up and allow it to just be there. I tell people to pretend as if in the old days you're sitting in a movie theater and the curtains part, and here comes the theme song to the movie. And the first 10, 15, 20 seconds, you're watching something with a theme song. You have no idea where the plot is going. You don't know how it's going to end. There's just a scene that is evoked by the music. And then stop it. And do that with a couple of songs so that you have images. And I specifically say, don't put yourself in them. These aren't dreamscapes. If you see, instead of saying, I see somebody in a hammock, that's cool, but don't say, I'm in a hammock when I hear this music and relaxing. So say you have an image of a beautiful beach. You hear the music and there's palm trees swaying and the ocean is blue and the sand is warm and it's beautiful. Stop it right there. Again, within every scene is a plot waiting to come out. There's a reason you came up with these characters and these scenarios. So then we get into a structure where you can take your scene, say, or your character, and build the plot that is inside of it. So if you go by a traditional method of telling a story, it's linear. So you have, say, Clever Jack, and Clever Jack is here, and then there's the king, and there's always a king, and he's always got a dragon problem, and he needs to get rid of the dragon. And the way he's going to do it is offer up his daughter, the princess. You get the princess, you get rid of the dragon. And so everybody tries to do it and they can't. But of course, there's the poor miller's son who happens to be really clever, Clever Jack. And he finds a way, because he is clever, to outsmart the dragon, and the dragon disappears. And all of a sudden, Clever Jack, because he's clever, gets the princess, and they get married, and they have lots of little baby kings and queens together, and life is good. Well, what if the story was a spiral? So you have Clever Jack, he needs to meet his nemesis. And there's a difference between a challenge and a nemesis. A challenge asks you to rise to the occasion with who you are. If he's clever Jack, he's going to be really clever. A nemesis is very personal to the character, and it's after you to destroy you. That's what a nemesis does in most definitions. So Jack needs a nemesis, and the nemesis is in effect going to destroy him so that he can be transformed. So it's a spiral. So you have clever Jack. And for example, what would be his nemesis? His nemesis would be looking silly, would be being foolish. So he rises to the occasion and he goes out to meet the dragon, but it turns out the dragon is more clever than he is and challenges him to chess and beats him at chess. Ha! And because he gets bored with clever Jack, he flies off, leaving Jack marrying the princess, but realizing he is not as clever as he thinks he is. What he gets from that is humility. What he ends up with is wisdom, which is a whole nother thing from being clever. He's still clever Jack, but now he's not a young boy who's clever. He's an adult man who has wisdom because he's learned humility. So he had to have a challenge or nemesis that he couldn't overtake. The nemesis is there to crack him open like a seed so that a sprout can come out. And again, if you have a scene, say it's that beach scene, and it's paradise and it's beautiful. And what is the nemesis to that beach scene? The nemesis might be chaos, might be brutality, might be ugliness. So how are you going to introduce this beach to that situation? So let's put that beach in, say, a snow globe. And you shake the snow globe and stars come down. It's a beautiful beach scene. And, you know, snow globes are so pretty. Let's give it to a little girl who lives in a violently alcoholic family. And life is very brutal for her. And her older brother smashes the snow globe and shows her there is no such thing as paradise. Look, this is just goo. And look, it's just plastic sprinkles. And this is garbage. And her father, she runs to her father, and her father basically tells her, if you're expecting paradise in this life, you're not going to get it. You better get strong and shape up. Well, she does. And she becomes really strong. And she starts her own business and she becomes really tough and really strong. And she has a daughter. And she teaches that daughter that somewhere out there is a beach with the beautiful waters lapping up and a palm trees, and that there is paradise out there. But maybe it isn't where you're standing. Maybe it's a place you have to carry in your heart. And so she has somebody come in and paint a mural so that her daughter can grow up in paradise. So paradise here is not the same as paradise here, but it is. Paradise has turned into something that has to live in your heart, not a physical place. Whereas if it had been in the linear, maybe that strong girl would have gone out and bought a beach and made it hers, and nobody was allowed on it, and she owns that specific beach. The beach had to break open and be destroyed in order to come back as something else. So that is just one method of telling your story, by listening to the nemesis that is inside your character. And so we sort of go through all the ramifications, because back in the beginning, when we were dealing with memories, I asked people to look at the memories, for example, to take a photo of yourself with a sibling and show it to that sibling. There you are, your kids, and say, do you remember what happened? And I've done this because my mom died recently, and I showed a photo of my brother and I in these mountains and up in New Hampshire. And I said, oh gosh, I remember that. That was the White Mountains. And oh, I felt like I could fly like an eagle, and it was wonderful. And my brother pointed out that I threw up in the car on the way up the mountain path. I had forgotten about that. Thank you very much. Leave it to a brother to remember this. And so what I remembered, there's a reason I remembered that, because your memories are stories. And so in my stories, there are frequently people that maybe learn to fly all on their own from a mountaintop. There are frequently people who see things in a different light and they have something to give. So listen to your stories, because your stories are trying to tell you something. And the nemesis helps you to discover what it is. So, long story long, you asked, that's how I teach it pretty much.
That's
I
wonderful,
have a
Vicky.
question. I mean, I really liked the sensory part you mentioned, with the smells, especially the smell is the sense that's closest to memory. Absolutely. And it brings back suppressed memories from childhood and things you wouldn't remember, you wouldn't expect you to remember. I really like that part, and I can see how this can be motivating for people. However, on the second part you described, one about listening to your story, I probably use a different verb. I'd say digest the story, but I think we're talking about the same thing in different wording. That part where you get inspiration on how the plot could evolve, you say, don't do it, hold on, suppress it. There are so many options out there. Is that right? Am I getting it right?
Mhm.
So don't follow just the first thread you see in front of you. Is that it?
That's exactly it. Because if you do that, you have told yourself there will never be another one.
You limit your
And
options,
this, I
right?
have to have this. You don't have to have that.
Because, you see, something inside me rebels in that, because it's like you suppress your creativity, but you say that this thing may work in your advantage, so I need to try that. I don't think I've tried that so far.
It's very hard. It's very difficult because we really we want to control. And if we let go, we're not controlling. And so, but you are controlling your expectations. And so when you start something, one of the interesting things is that you find yourself coming up with something and you have to let it go. And so then you come up with something else and it's a little wilder. And then you come up with something else and it's a little stranger. And before you know it, you're going places you didn't think you were going to go. And so the circle gets wider, and you learn the discipline of, this isn't about my presenting a perfect story to a listener. This is about my allowing myself to fly, to get wings and fly with a story. It's hard
Makes
work.
sense. Yeah. And Vicky, I've got a very short question, but that I'd like to elaborate a little, and you can choose how to answer this question. So the question is, why? So why do you create stories? Why do you think people should create stories? Why do you teach workshops? Why do people come to your workshops? So why? Why? I want you. You can elaborate on that and choose what to answer.
Uh, I create stories for myself because it's natural for me. I mean, that's just my MO. It may not be everybody's thing to do. Um, so I can only teach this particular narrow. I know people who tell personal stories who are brilliant at it. I can't do that. That's not. I've tried. I'm awful. I cannot tell personal stories. Um, and folk tales, I'm not good at that because I can't remember them. So it is important that if you want to learn to do that, this is something. How do I say this? That is in your heart that you want to do. And the reason that I think it's important, for example, I was thinking about, I would love to teach graphic artists who are doing these graphic novels now. That's a lot of art, but they're not sure about the storyline. And so you need to really, if you're going to put that much effort into it, the story has to come from somewhere deep inside, not what you think other people are going to pay to hear or to read. And so I think it's important. To me, it's a spiritual practice. it's a practice of humility, of letting go, of putting my ego at the service of my spirit as opposed to the other way around. Does that make sense? And things come out of it that are things that I happen to be emotionally or spiritually working on at the moment. And they help to clarify my journey. Does that?
Yeah, what I think is most interesting from this podcast Simona and I are putting up together, is that we find that there are so many ways of telling stories, so many different genres, and anyone really can try different things until they find what suits them and their personal needs. I mean, there's no such thing as right or wrong, as you said. It's not linear, absolutely. So you can try different things. You can try personal tales, or you can try telltales, and you can try folk tales or myths or
Yeah.
whatever, until you find what suits you. On one hand. On the other hand, to be honest, there are things I would like to create a story about, like, for example, bullying. That's a big thing because both Simona and I are educators. So we come across that. And sometimes you just wish there was a story you could share with the students that would maybe help them out in a difficult situation. But I can't. I've tried, I've listened to stories. Hold that thought, my love. I've listened to stories and I've read stories, of course, and I can see how writers are trying to show how kindness might help overcome the others' bad behavior. But still, to be honest, if I wrote a story like that, I would just get back to the bullies. I wouldn't be so kind. I wouldn't be good enough. I wouldn't be wise enough to try to pass that to my students because it wouldn't be inside me. It wouldn't be there. It would be fake.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, I think personally, somebody brought up in a group I was in, are all stories morality stories? And that's an interesting point. So when you talk about bullying, is the point of your story to teach that bullying is not right? And all my stories are morality stories. But they don't start out that way. They start out with a premise. And so, for example, I told a story about a guy who just sees beauty in everything, and he believes he has gold in the golden leaves and silver in the silvery water that's coming down in rain, and he sees pomegranate seeds and they're rubies. He's the richest man on earth, and a greedy, selfish neighbor wants that gold and silver and rubies, and she and her terrible nephew do everything they can to get them, and he has to give them to them and say okay. And in the end, he is walking to the library and he sees a rock that has mica chips in it, and he feels like he has diamonds, he has constellations in his hand. He's the richest man on earth. They meanwhile have opened up the box where Abner put all the rubies and gold and silver, and they find rainwater and a dead leaf and some shriveled up seeds, and they argue and they scream until the house falls down, and they're left with nothing but a table and two very angry people and a box of garbage. And so the plot, and so then in the end I say, and so it is that the very same things that bring wealth to the open-hearted and generous and kind brings only poverty to those who are greedy and violent. So you can bring it around that way, but I think it's hard to tell a story and starting with the ending, the morality that you want to tell. I have to start and then let it go to its moral endings. I don't know how you do that except just tell a lot of stories, and then you can move it in whatever direction you want. Did that answer the question? I don't know.
Well, it wasn't a question really. I just wanted to see your point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very hard to start with, I'm going to tell a story about being kind, because you're starting up here then.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's not it. That's not what I had in mind. I did not have a premeditated end. My point is that I wouldn't know how to end it so that I pass across the right message to kids. And the thing that prevents me from creating such a story is that I wouldn't know how I'd want it to end. I mean, all the endings that I've read or heard so far do not work for me, you see.
You know, I think that's why I tell stories to adults, because I don't want to edit. The end is the end, and that's my end. And other people have their stories and their ends. I have told stories to kids and made up stories for kids, and I really don't enjoy it. I do it if I have to, but I like telling to adults because then I can just open my mouth and stuff comes out.
And now that you said that, perhaps you'd have a little story for us? We're both adults here, and hopefully
Yes,
our audience will be as well.
sure. Yes. Um,
Yay.
I'd like to introduce you to something that a storyteller from the East Coast, Here's Crow. Her name, she goes by the name Here's Crow. She introduced something called pocket stories. Pocket stories are small stories that you keep in your pocket. And if somebody says, do you have a story? You don't have to stop and freeze and worry about whether you have some epic to tell. You simply have a short story. It's 3 to 5 minutes. It's very simple. And you can just bring it out anytime you want. So I've started to create pocket stories. And this one, uh, anyway, I just tell the story because I've done two of them, and both of them sort of circle around vision and how we see things. With a twinkle and a tinkle and a clang, an enormous pile of stuff pushed into a rough, brightly painted cart rumbled down the road. Why, there were bottles and books, and there were pots and pans, and there were utensils, brightly polished, clanging against the sides of the cart. And it was all pulled by a very sleepy donkey whose ears swayed with every step. And at the end of his ears, why, there were tassels. And the whole affair was led by a very odd looking man in a green outfit with a red hat on his head. Lumbering, rumbling into town he came. Now, the town was very, very contented with itself, very certain that they knew how everything should go and how it might go in the future. They had it all contained. Oh, they were so happy with themselves. And so when he came into town, looking like the cross between a garbage scow and a parade float, well, they couldn't help but ask themselves, ew, who is that? And then they asked themselves, what is he doing? And then they asked themselves, yeah, and where is he going? Well, he was going outside of town. And he set up camp, and he built himself a fire, and he put a cauldron on top of it, and he started mixing up his brew. Mushrooms, leaves, branches, all kinds of things in his cauldron, and it bubbled. And the next day, he sold his brew in bottles. He called it the elixir of life. Oh, yes, it'll make your eyes bright. Oh, your ears sharp. Oh, and it'll open up your heart so that you can see all the secrets and longings of your heart. And more than that, it'll give you the courage and the wisdom to find the answer to those longings. Well, everybody wanted that. I mean, of course you do. Everybody wants that. And so they all got in line. He had a huge earthenware jug and little tiny cups, and he poured samples into each cup and handed them out to people. Their own samples of the elixir of life. One bottle will do you. Give it a taste and buy a bottle. Ooh. Oh, they looked in their little tiny cups and, ooh, it was murky and it was scuzzy and it stank. So they looked in their neighbor's cup. Ew, that's mold. Ew. And then they looked in the other neighbor's cup. Oh, is that a feather? Ew, gross. Ooh, ooh, disgusting. Ooh. And so they poured their little cup out, or they threw it over their shoulder. And the man went on, the peddler selling and selling, but by the end of the day, he hadn't sold one bottle. With a good-natured shrug, he went back to his camp. Next day, with a twinkle and a tinkle and a clang, oh, the whole cart with all the bottles and books and pots and pans, and the donkey lumbered down the road, and they kept going till they went up the hills, and then they went up into the mountains, and then they were lost in the mists of the mountains. Now, to be honest, the people in this town, who, as I said, were very neat and contained and very, very pleased with themselves, while they were happy to see the back of him. Hmm. But something had changed. Something inside them had started stirring, like the slow sleeping buzzing of flies bumping into each other. It was, their imaginations were stirred, and they were, but it, well, and they started telling each other, did you see him? His skin was green, and he had red hair that moved independent of the breeze. And somebody else said, oh, he was dressed all in wood bark, and he had a long nose with leaves that grew out of the end. And somebody else said, I think he was a demon. And somebody else said, oh no, I saw him. He came and go, and he glowed with light. He was a spirit from another world. And other people just said he was the devil. Well, they couldn't agree on what they saw. And the more they talked about it, and the more they thought about it, the more they hankered on seeing him come back through again, see, so they could make fun of him, and they could prove that they were right with what they saw. And they, against their better nature, they spent a lot of time looking down that road and up into the mountains, hoping he would come back through again. But he never did. And they were left with their tiny little empty cups and a troublesome, powerful thirst for something more. So that's a pocket story.
It's a brilliant story. And
Oh.
Vicky, so you said you created this story yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where did you get the inspiration from? Do you remember? Was there something
I just was
specific?
listening to music. One Sunday morning, I listened to music with my chai, and I've forgotten what the music was, but it was, there was a cart, and it was overloaded with stuff, and I thought, wow, here he goes. Where's he going to go? Well, he's got to go into some place that is the opposite of him. I mean, that just sort of makes sense. And there he goes into a town that is the opposite of him, and that's the plot, basically.
That's brilliant. And we interviewed the Here's Crow for the
Oh,
podcast, so it was brilliant that you mentioned her. And we've got so many questions. I'll try to choose one. Despina, in the meantime, have you got a question that you'd like to ask?
I don't have a question. It's just, your story, Vicky, brought another story to mind. Sometimes this happens with stories. There's this story I heard by Kath Edwards once about a king who had all the luxury in the world, of course, being a king, and best meals and whatever dish would be most elaborate his chefs could produce. But one time while he was dining, this kind of bone got stuck in his throat, and he started coughing and coughing, and it just wouldn't go down. So doctors were sent for, and they came, and they had a meeting again. They decided what kind of remedy would be suitable for the king, and they produced this potion and that, and they gave it to the king to have a sip, and the situation just got worse. And every time they tried something new, nothing would work, until the cleaning lady who was passing through the throne room saw them in their efforts to restore the health of the king. And she, in her very uneducated manner, asked them, perhaps a glass of water would do? And they all scolded her, and would they ever consider of handing such a humiliation to their sire? And, they just sent her off and carried on with their remedies and their potions.
Yeah. I actually just told a pocket story that is so much like that. And I think what's so interesting is how universal they are. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, the story that I had told just a couple of weeks ago was is so much like that. It's sort of shocking. And I thought, wow, we all know the same stories. We all know the same characters, you know?
I think the one you told, and well, both of them actually, both the stories that you and Espina told are stories for our times. Maybe stories for now and for earlier on and for the future, and that we've got simple solutions in front of us, but that we don't want to see them and to accept them.
Yeah. We tend to live in the past and the future and the theories and all that, when what is right in front of you, if you just grab it, you can make something beautiful out of it. But we tend not to do that.
Yeah, we have the tendency of overcomplicating things in our brains. That's it. Or the fear of trying out something new.
Absolutely. Yeah. Would you like me to tell the other story that's so much like it?
Please,
Yes,
please.
It's
please.
another pocket story. It's short, but it just sort of blows my mind how much it was alike in a lot of ways. An enormous white cumulus cloud sailed across an April blue sky. Oh, it was a beautiful cloud. It rose up, shimmering in sunlight like a spun sugar fairy tale castle. And everybody in the little village saw it and came up on the grassy hillside to watch it. It was stunning. It was beautiful. But when it slowly, silently sailed overhead, why, they could look up, and it wasn't quite so white and crystalline. It was sort of gray and swirling and troubled, foggy. Ooh. And all of a sudden, out of the belly of the cloud, unfurled tens, no, hundreds of ribbons in beautiful colors, satiny ribbons in a salmon color or a sparkling red or a deep cobalt blue. Oh, the ribbons came down, swaying seductively in the April breeze and ending just about nose height to the people. Oh, a daffodil yellow. Oh, a cobalt blue. Oh, look at that firecracker red. Oh, the ribbons danced right in front of their noses. They were so tempting. Until one man said, I'm going to grab that red one. And I bet if I grab it and pull on it, why, all the gold in heaven will fall down on me. And everybody around him said, well, no, don't do that. If you grab hold of that and pull it, why cartloads and cartloads of horse poop could fall on your head. Did you think about that? Oh. And they all rethought, and they looked up into the gray swirling that was filled with their dreams and their disasters, and oh, they couldn't decide what might happen if they grabbed those ribbons. It might be, what they want, but it might be what they deserve. Oh, no. Oh, can't think about that. And so little girl said, oh, mommy, can you pull that pink ribbon? I bet I'll get cookies. And her mama said, no, we can't do that. Why, if I pull on that pink ribbon, why, you don't know, you might get barrels and barrels full of stinky old gym socks. You wouldn't want that, would you? Oh, everybody looked up into the gray, swirling unknowing and wondered what, well, the moment was broken when quacky old Agnes showed up. Quacky old Agnes was, as in America we say, a can short of a full six-pack. She was kind of strange. She came up in her muddy old Wellington boots and her misshapen, brightly colored cotton dress and the ugliest hat perched on her head like a ravenous bird, and her hair flying off. And she came up, wah, wah, what are you doing? Ah, what are you looking at? Ah, oh, I want that yellow ribbon. And she reached up to grab a daffodil yellow ribbon, and everybody slapped her hand down and said, Agnes, don't touch that ribbon. You don't know what you'll get. Wah. Okay, I want the blue one then. No, Agnes, stop it. No, you can't. Stop it. You don't know what you'll get. Well, they looked deep into her sparkling, deep set, kind of feral eyes, and they realized she wasn't going to listen to them. So they told her that she could grab any of the ribbons she wanted, but first they had to go home, which is what they did. They ran back to their hovels, and they closed the doors and they closed up the shutters. One of them pushed open a shutter and said, Go for it, Agnes, and closed the shutter again. And then they waited for Armageddon to fall from heavens. Oh, for the screams of hell, the smell of sulfur, the howls of the damned to fall down. Oh, it would be terrible, terrible. And they waited. Well, finally, they just opened the shutters and the doors. And there was nothing there but a beautiful grassy hillside and a clear blue sky. So they all went up to the hillside and stood as the grass waved gently in the April breeze, a sea of living green around them and a beautiful clear sky. Well, what do you think just happened? And somebody theorized that there was actually a monster up in the cloud. That's what it was. And it was like a squid. And it lowered down its tentacles, which looked to us like ribbons, but it was tentacles. And if you grabbed one of them, why, the tentacles would wrap around you and heave you back up into the belly of the cloud, and the monster would devour you like a delectable appetizer. Yeah. Well, it's a little hard to imagine Agnes as a delectable appetizer, but on the other hand, she wasn't here, and neither was the cloud. So they contented themselves to cross themselves and go on about their day every time they thought of poor old Agnes. Well, weeks went by, and the county seat had their usual every month fair where, everybody from all the little villages would go, and the farmers would be there with the produce, and the bakers would roll out carts filled with fragrant breads. And the craftsmen would have all their things set out. And there in the middle of the craftsmen was Agnes, with the most beautiful baskets woven of ribbons. Why, this one was a satin ribbon with a deep red and a shiny silver, and that one was forest green with citron bright and turquoise, and that one was baby blue with deep yellows and oranges. They were just stunning. They were gorgeous, and she was selling them like hotcakes. People from the village elbowed each other and said, Well, she didn't get horse shed on her head, did she? No, she didn't get gold either, did she? Finally, one of them got the courage to say, Agnes, and he talked to her like a 4-year-old, which is what they did with Agnes. Agnes, when you grabbed the ribbons, what did you get? And she looked at them like she had seen them for the first time. What do you mean, what did I get? I got ribbons. And so she had, and she was all the richer for it. The same character as the cleaning lady.
It's a wonderful, wonderful story. And Vicky, I just love how you're into the story when you're telling the story. And I'm just very, very sad that this is just audio only, and our listeners can't see you when you're telling these stories, because well, Despina and I got the full experience, and you're so expressive, and I just remember that Despina at the beginning introduced you as a master of character voices, and well, voices and facial expressions. So, uh, and Vicky, so how do you create characters and characters' voices? Does it just come spontaneous to you? Do you think about it? Do you have a background with theater, acting, something?
You know what I tell people about expressions is look at cartoonists because they use lines. Don't look at actors, don't look at yourself in the mirror, look at cartoonists. So if you look, for example, if somebody is unhappy, there's a big old, look at the lines and it may move your face the way it feels the line will be. Don't look in the mirror. If, for example, you're looking at a Daffy Duck is in a boat with Elmer Fudd, and Daffy Duck says, "What's this big cork in the middle of the boat?" And he pulls it up, and of course, that's what's keeping the boat afloat. Elmer Fudd doesn't look down, which is what everybody would do. You see his face and you see his eyes. Do that. Do that. Don't do what you naturally would do, which is to look down so then all people see is the top of your head. Do what cartoonists do. They have a square and they fill it with lines. So that's, as far as the expressions go, that's a help. And voices, once you get your character going, the voice will come. I really believe that. So you just have to create your character. And I do it by finding two words that make fun, that are funny to me. So for example, I have a character named Alma Tidy Bones. Well, Tidy Bones is a particular old lady. And if I can see her, I can hear her voice. And she talks in a very flipped sort of manner. Yes. Wow, that's the truth. You can hear her because you've created her, but you have to create her first and then let her speak in the voice that she has, if that makes sense.
I was thinking the same, Simone. While Vicky was telling the story, to us who were looking at her, it was obvious that she was seeing the things she was describing. She had images in front of her, not just impersonation, I mean, but you look at the things you're talking about. And we had the same discussion with an Irish lady just the other day. I don't know if you know her, Maria Gillan from Cork, Ireland.
I've heard of her, yes, but I've never heard her tell a story. Yes.
Oh, that's a pity. She's brilliant. And she was telling us about this thing, how she creates, Simone asked her this question, how she remembers, how she does not forget the part of the story. And she said that if you have clear images of what's happening, you don't lose the thread. Like,
It's true. And
yeah.
if you're living it, then you can improvise. Because maybe something is happening that you forget, but if you're living it, a natural progression will happen. So that you don't tell the same story the same way over and over. But you
Yeah,
do have to live in it.
we're not actors anyway. We do not learn it word by word. We have to use improvisation in every telling.
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody has your charisma, Vicky. Not everybody can do voices. But what people can do, if you have character in mind, it might be just a slight change of intonation, or not necessarily a different voice. It can be the way you use your body, whether it's, ragged or you're sitting straight and you're royalty or whatever. Slight differences that create the differences between the characters. That works for many tellers who cannot do different voices. Or, I try, but we strain our vocal cords in the effort.
Well, if you see somebody in your mind's eye like quacky old Agnes, and I see her in my mind's eye, it's, if you've ever known an older woman who is like that, they do speak loudly. They don't hold back. And so you can you have experienced the characters that you're telling, and you just exaggerate it a little bit. I was thinking about different storytellers, and there's a group in Montreal that has some people, that one person who actually memorizes epic poetry, which is one thing, but also ballad singers. People who sing ballads are technically storytellers. And that's another, storytelling is such a wide thing.
It is, yeah. Concerning epics, the reason they were written in the form of a poem, not necessarily rhyming, but rhythmic, is that it facilitated memorizing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's much,
I don't know how people do that. I don't.
well, it's much easier to remember if you can sort of sing it. If you sing along, you know how the story goes, and then you don't forget the lyrics.
But on the other hand, if you mess up a word, the next sentence has to rhyme. And how are you going to do that? I don't know. The whole thing just makes my head hurt. I can't imagine.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. In the ancient Greek epics, it did not rhyme. There was no rhyming. It was just rhythm.
Cadence. Yeah.
Well, this has been a lesson to us both. Thank you very much for teaching us
Oh, and
today.
I'm glad to have talked to you. And I'm so glad that you got to talk to Here's Crow. And there's just so many fabulous people with different styles of storytelling.
Indeed, indeed. And as we get along in this podcast, we interview different people from different backgrounds. Some are seasoned storytellers, some are in the beginning of their journey, and it's so diverse and interesting. All the more interesting for that, actually.
And I think one of the most important things you can impart is that tell the story that you love. Don't tell the story you think other people want to hear. Tell the one you love, because that's, if you try, yeah, be true to the story you want to tell. There are so many
Vicky,
types of stories.
yeah. And well, I have to say that you certainly inspired me to start telling the stories that I create a little bit more. I always tend not to do that, to just tell folk tales and
No, no, no,
fairy tales and stuff, and never to tell what I create. But
no.
you inspired me to start doing it a little bit more.
Please do. And Despina told a story, a wonderful corpse bride story. Well, honey, I have gotten more mileage out of that because I change it every time I tell it. I change the ending. So you can do that too. You can take something that is a classic and just run with it. So, if that's another way of going.
Or
So,
another way to digest the story as well.
yes, exactly. And you can have fun with it because it's not entirely yours. So if somebody says, well, that's stupid, you could say, well, it's a classic tale. If you don't like it, who cares? You can just I'm telling a classic tale, and now you're free to just go do whatever you want to do.
Play with it, right?
Exactly. But
So, well,
anyway,
thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a wonderful hour, and this is what happens every time. We don't even realize how time flows when we talk
yes,
with other storytellers. It's so
yes.
nice.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. And I'm so excited you guys are doing this. I think this is wonderful.